polar bear doesn't own a coat, it grew one. A camel doesn't carry shade, it is the shade. Every animal on this planet shows up already built for the place it lives. And then there's us. You belong to the only species on Earth that has to construct its own outer layer every single morning before it can safely go outside. Take that away, put you on a mountain, and you are dead in a night. In most of the places your species has chosen to live, you would not survive being what you actually are. So the obvious answer is that it got cold and we covered up. That's true. And it explains almost nothing. Because before any of this, we did something much stranger. Look at any other primate, chimpanzee, gorilla, orangutan, baboon, covered every one of them. We are not slightly less hairy than a chimp, we are a different category of animal. And we didn't drift into that. Genetics puts the loss of human body hair at roughly 1.2 million years ago, and we can date it because bare skin needed dark pigment to survive the sun, so the genes for skin color carry a timestamp. The reason we lost it is heat. We became endurance hunters, and the strategy is simple and brutal. You follow an animal through the hottest part of the day and you keep following it because it has to stop to cool down and you don't. Fur traps heat, bare skin covered in sweat glands is a radiator. So we didn't lose our fur by accident. We threw it away because it was in the way. And then, roughly a million years later, humans start wearing hides. Sit with the shape of that for a second. We spent a million years evolving a body specifically optimized for heat, and then we built a removable version of the exact thing evolution had just finished deleting. But look at what that actually buys you. A coat comes off, fur doesn't. A polar bear cannot get out of its coat. It is stuck on one setting for life, and if the world around it changes, that's its problem. We can hunt bear at noon and be warm at midnight. Same body, different equipment. We didn't undo the change. We invented a switch. Okay, so when? And here is where it gets difficult because clothes rot. Skin, fur, hide, plant fiber, all of it decays. The oldest preserved fabric we have anywhere on Earth is about 30,000 years old. Some wild flax fibers from a cave in Georgia, a few of them had even been dyed. 30,000 years sounds like a lot. For this question, it is nothing. That's the end of the story, not the beginning. There is no first coat sitting in a museum. There is no layer in the ground where clothing starts. Which is why in 2003, a group of researchers went and looked at lice. Humans have two kinds, head lice, which live in your hair exactly where you would expect, and body lice, which do not live on your body at all. They live in your clothing. They only crawl onto you to feed. Now think about what that means. Body lice could not have existed before clothing existed. There was nowhere for them to live. So if you date the genetic split between head lice and body lice, you have dated the invention of clothing. The answer comes back at somewhere around 170,000 years ago. Nobody ever found the first coat. We found the first thing that lived in it. There is some direct evidence, it just isn't the clothes. At a site called Contrabander's Cave on the Atlantic coast of Morocco, archaeologists dug through layers between 120 and 90,000 years old. They found dozens of bone tools, not weapons, not butchery tools, tools shaped and worn in the specific way bone wears when you use it to scrape a hide clean. And in the same layers, animal bones, foxes, jackals, wildcats. Those are terrible meals, there is almost no meat on any of them. But the cut marks on those bones aren't butchery marks, they are the pattern you get from skinning. They weren't eating them. They were wearing them. And the oldest sewing needle anyone has ever found, an actual needle with an eye in it, is about 50,000 years old, out of a cave in Siberia. So hide scrapers at 120,000 years, needles at 50. It took our species 70,000 years to think of thread. And I want to kill one explanation before we go any further, because it's the one everybody reaches for. It wasn't modesty. Modesty is a consequence of clothing. It is not the cause. You cannot be embarrassed about being uncovered until being covered is the normal thing. And we know this because plenty of societies wore very little well into recorded history in front of visiting Europeans who found it scandalous and wrote pages and pages about it. The people being stared at were not embarrassed. The people staring were. But here's the part that really settles it. Ornament is older than covering. Shell beads from a cave in Morocco date to about 142,000 years ago, deliberately pierced, deliberately strung, deliberately worn. So the order goes: decorate first, cover later. We were accessorizing for tens of thousands of years before we ever got dressed. None of this is one person's theory. The lice work was published in Current Biology in 2003 and again in Molecular Biology and Evolution in 2011. The flax was in Science. The Moroccan cave was in iScience. The beads were in Science Advances. And the climate side of it comes from Ian Gilligan, whose book on this came out of Cambridge University Press. Genetics, archaeology, and climate modeling, arriving at roughly the same place from three completely different directions. Okay, now the part that makes the mystery a lot smaller. Start with the dates because I have been quoting them like they're solid, and they are. Those lice numbers are estimates. They depend on an assumed mutation rate, and if that rate is off, everything moves with it. The 2003 study said 72,000 years. The 2011 study said 170,000. Same event, same method, 100,000 years apart. Anybody who gives you a confident date for the invention of clothing is guessing. And the boring answer really is most of the answer. Gilligan's work models clothing against the climate record, and the fit is almost embarrassing. When the world gets colder, clothing gets more complex. When it warms up, clothing gets simpler again, over and over through glacial cycle after glacial cycle. It isn't a mystery, it's a thermostat. Even that 70,000-year gap stops being strange. A hide thrown over your shoulders is fine in mild cold. You only need tailoring, actual fitted clothing that seals at the wrists and the neck when you are trying to survive an ice age. Which is precisely when needles show up. But Gilligan takes it one step further, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting. Once you are wearing clothes all the time, you need material, and hides run out. You can only kill so many animals. What you need is fiber in quantity, reliably, every single year. Which means you need to grow it. He argues that the demand for something to wear is part of what pushed our species into farming. And if that's right, then clothing isn't a footnote in the story of civilization. Clothing is one of the reasons there is one. But there is one thing the cold cannot explain. Every other adaptation to cold is reversible. Move a species somewhere warm and the adaptation fades out. Fur thins, fat drops, body shape changes over generations. It goes away because it costs something to maintain, and it is no longer earning. Humans walked back into the hottest places on the planet and kept the clothes on. There is no thermal argument for a shirt in Lagos or Jakarta or Manaus. None. It makes you hotter. It costs money and it costs labor, and it is completely, universally non-negotiable. Somewhere between a hide thrown over your shoulders in an ice age and a species that cannot leave the house uncovered in 40-degree heat, clothing stopped being equipment and turned into something else. And nobody can point at when. There is no layer in the ground for it, no tool that marks it. The lice can tell us when we started covering up. They can't tell us when we stopped being able to stop. You will put something on tomorrow morning without thinking about it once. So will 8 billion other people, including everybody living somewhere it makes them hotter, not cooler. A species that spent 1 million years getting rid of its fur. Then spent the next 170,000 years building a replacement. And then forgot it was ever optional.